Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights. Here are your hosts, Hector Kolonas and LaRosa.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the This Week in Coworking podcast feed. I am Hector Kolonas, and I'm joined once again by my awesome co-host, LaRosa. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing great. It was maybe a little bit slower of a news week, so there wasn't as much news, but that doesn't mean that there's not plenty for us to dive into. So I'm looking forward to another recap this week.
Absolutely. And you said it was a slow week, but we did see some market moves across 8 and 9 countries this week alone. So quite a busy move on kind of the new openings, expansions, launching new expanding after 13 years, a lot of that. But in this week's podcast, we're actually going to look at, a shift to make buying and selling co-working spaces more transparent and easy. Just really looking at what this flight to quality actually means on the ground. We're going to look at some kind of micro co-working plays that are happening, 3 different ones from across the newsletter this week, as well as just look at, what is AI enabling folks who are not coders to do in and around co-working. So on that note, this week's newsletter is sponsored by DenSwap, basically bringing out the news that TWIC, This Week in Coworking, and DenSwap have partnered together to make it easier and faster for folks who are looking to sell their co-working business or to buy someone else's co-working business. Just make it easier, faster, more transparent, really remove the guesswork around valuations and pricing and what is the revenue run rate? How long is it going to take me to get my money back? How long is it going to get me to get out of this if I'm doing seller financing? And really packaging that into one service. So if you're interested in that and you are thinking about selling your co-working space, definitely hit the newsletter, click on that link, start the process, and let's see if we can help you make that next strategic move, whether it's buying or selling your co-working space.
This is super, super exciting, Hector. And I literally woke up this morning to an email from someone that was looking for information on how to evaluate their business with potential to either sell it or find someone to back them to expand it. And so it's just very funny timing. Great news from TWIC and DenSwap, but then also including the article we'll be talking about from David Walker. It's just kind of funny how things happen. So this is a really big update, and excited to see how we can help co-working operators either exit or grow.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a really interesting one because a lot of folks think that you have to sell your business at like a bajillion dollars, right? But what we've found, especially from the conversations I've had over the last couple of years, is most times when people are selling, they either just need a life change or there is a life change that happened that means they no longer can run that space. Their spouse got a great job offer somewhere else. They've decided to go buy a house in another state. They're moving countries. These are all life events that kind of trigger a sell event, but it doesn't mean that they're trying to get out or close or abandon their space, right? So really kind of explaining that. And I mean, if you didn't catch it, definitely go back and listen to my interview with Craig a couple of weeks ago on our podcast feed, where we dove into the fact that he's sold co-working spaces, he's bought co-working spaces, he's just merged his co-working group with another group. So he's done every transaction under the sun. And so when I was looking at how we can best facilitate folks making this really hard decision, Craig was one of the first people that I reached out to. So glad that we managed to get this in place. But that's enough about that. Not everybody's looking to sell their space, and we love the fact that you're all doing great work out there. So what I'm going to do is move it over to our first news story this week. So we're going to jump over to the UK. Natasha from Runway East was very vocal this week about how there's a very big misunderstanding around what exactly flight to quality is, at least in the London and UK ecosystem. A lot of folks automatically assume that when they hear that occupiers or members are trying to find that flight to quality, that they're going from B and C class buildings to A class buildings. But what's actually happening is folks are looking for the other additional services, that support, that community. That is what they're classifying in the how do we quantify quality, as opposed to, oh, this is this brand new shiny building. Yes, it factors into it, the age of the building, the amenities, the technology, all of that. But it's also that kind of value add that the operating team brings to the building that also contributes to the quality conversation. And so I just loved the way Natasha's kind of summarized this and I really wanted to kind of put it out there as something, just kind of remember that if you are in a B or C class building, you can still win that flight to quality by increasing the value add that you bring to the building.
Yeah, 100%. Reading this post, it's something that I live and breathe in the day job every day, talking to large building owners that are just trying to reimagine and understand how to pivot these assets above and beyond just delivering standardized floor plates. And it's really fascinating how this industry continues to head for the collision with hospitality. And it's not just about the actual physical amenities, but it's also then about how the tenants can interact and access with those amenities. Because oftentimes it is fascinating to see there has been a disconnect between tenants even knowing what's available. Because there is kind of a disconnect between the decision maker who's touring the building versus the end user employee that's coming in might not know that there's additional gyms or golf simulators or whatever it be. So it really is exciting to see. I think everyone's focused on Class A and discounting these Class B or C's, not understanding that really it is about the experience. And so, a better experience in maybe an older building will still beat out the biggest, brightest, shiniest new place that you can't interact with or there's no programmatic component to.
Absolutely well said, Mike. So we have another story. I think we're going to hop over to Australia next. Is that right?
Yeah, so I don't know if there's a record for how many mentions in the Twic newsletter or podcast. I don't know if it's consecutive. Maybe they took off last week, but WOTSO is once again in the news with speaking of amenities and flight to quality, kind of a correlated topic. So they are rolling out what I'm really excited about as a former Starbucks store manager is the WOTSO Coworking Cafe, but there's no coffee being sold. So it is not like one of those Capital One cafes or some of those other types of kind of like coffee shop, hybrids. This is strictly kind of like what they're calling WOTSO Express. I apologize to all of our loyal listeners, but I love a comparison to airports. There is kind of this new trend with some of these airport lounges too, where it's kind of this express model, right? Where you're tapping in, you're grabbing some grab and go food, you're getting a coffee, and then you're on your way out. You're not hanging out doing work. And so what's so unique about this is that it's in the ground floor, highly foot trafficked area. The owner's looking to try to figure out how to monetize it. More than likely, it was probably either a former restaurant or retail space, or in the past would have been marketed to retailers or restaurants. And I think it just goes to show that there's continued opportunity for different niches within the flex workspace umbrella. And this is just another one. And it's just exciting. I think that technology advancements probably enable this kind of concept to be better delivered. And WOTSO, in the fact that they've got all these different types of concepts, we've reported a long time ago, they had an autonomously run space that they didn't have to have staff. This is probably some type of result of that. I don't know if they have staffed or not, but it is also then part of their passport program, which is then speaking to how you bring an aggregator play in. I love everything about this. I wish we could get Jesse back on the podcast because
we are going to. Jesse has
great.
agreed to come back on the podcast, so we're just doing scheduling. We will have her in, and we're going to ask all about these different concepts, what's working, what lessons and challenges is she facing, and so we're definitely going to bring her in and kind of have that conversation with the CEO over at WOTSO. But yeah, it's just really, really interesting because it's also so closely tied to the other trends we're watching, right? Where these micro, high foot trafficked areas are experimenting with different types of workspace. We saw it a couple of weeks ago in the Philippines. We saw it this week again in Brazil with IWG and Regis. We're seeing it in Brooklyn with Alcove and a Hilton hotel. So all these areas that were dead space being reactivated or trying to be activated with some form of drop-in express etc. type of offering. But what I love the most about that kind of through line is that this is happening everywhere, right? We're seeing, as I said, Brazil, UK, Germany a couple of weeks ago, Philippines, now Australia. And even Jesse in the press release said that, this is a concept that they picked up looking at the European market. And so a lot of the times, a lot of our American readers will be like, oh, I love the seeing what's happening in the rest of the world, but we only care about what's happening in America. And they don't really say that out loud. But by seeing what everyone else is doing in every other territory, our whole premise is that we're creating actionable insights that you and your team can be like, oh, well, they tried that in the Philippines. Let's kind of see what they did there. They tried that in Australia. They're trying that in Europe. How does that affect our business? And that's how we kind of rise the tide, right?
Yeah, which makes you wonder, like, where did they go wrong with the DB rail in Germany? Like, if this is taking off everywhere, not to throw anyone under the bus, but it is really fascinating when you've got a global viewpoint. You can see which trends are taking off, how are they successful, and that's ultimately what the real estate game is. There's
Yep.
never anything new. It's just kind of a case study of another development. If you've been
Mhm.
to one outdoor town center, you've been to them all, right?
Yeah.
It's a blend of that mixed use, which I guess just means that flex is just more so and more becoming a solidified part of a real
Mhm.
estate strategy, which is rising tide lift all ships. So
Yep.
it's exciting news all around. And on that topic, kind of leading to better understanding your business. I know we talked earlier about those that might want to be exiting, but others might want to be trying to figure out how to expand or how to put
Mhm.
a valuation on what it is that they do. Or, they might have been approached by a developer that says, hey, we want you to work with us. Where do you start? David from Co-working Consulting, he's an OG co-working operator from the early days of Austin, Texas. He's always on these different things. I love following him on LinkedIn. He recently just posted about a new tool that he built using AI on how to value those businesses. What were your takeaways on this, Hector? Because I found it fascinating.
Yeah, I always love kind of chit-chatting with David. The great thing about what I do here and my day job is I'm speaking to the consultants, the technologists, the operators all day, every day, from the exec all the way front down to the front of house. And it's always great speaking to David and see what he's working on. I know that he's doing a very big deep dive into what he could do with AI. And I think that actually picks up on another trend outside of co-working, one that I think affects our industry in two ways. And that is the idea of a solo or a tiny team business being able to very rapidly turn around products and services that used to take entire engineering teams months to build. We don't have to look too far. Just yesterday, there was an acquisition of a app building AI tool that allowed people to kind of vibe code their way to an app prototype. One founder on his own got bought by Wix for $80 million. So it's the first time where that's kind of happened outside of the industry, but it's also worth noting that if people can create tools that are valued now publicly at $80 million, what happens to the technology in our industry, right? We know that a lot of operators at some point in their history started developing their own software. They started going down that route of this off-the-shelf stuff doesn't work for me. The integrations of this, whatever. What happens if we hire our own engineering team? What happens if we build it in-house? What happens now where a single person with an empty weekend could pull together a prototype? What does that mean for our industry? What does that happen to like the stack, right? What happens to like the mess, the chaos of technology in our industry and the sales process for all of that and the engineering talent? There's a big shift happening there, and it's still early days, but I definitely want to kind of highlight it. On the second, before I return to the actual David piece, is are you servicing these solo AI entrepreneurs? Because for a very long time, everyone shifted towards we need to support the enterprise, the teams, the team passes. Wouldn't it have been wonderful if this gentleman who just sold his startup, one person startup for $80 million was working from your co-working space? Isn't that a win for your community? Isn't that a win for your hyper local economy? Isn't that a win for your branding, your storytelling? You've now got a potential investor to invest in other startups. And so like, keep in mind that this is happening outside our industry, and it's not just freelancers anymore. These are folks that are building entire organizations powered by AI agents through AI vibe coding tools. Just keep an eye on this. I think it's going to be a huge opportunity, just like the Etsy sellers of a few years ago, where this new sudden market appeared and no one was really servicing them. So just kind of keep an eye on that. I've been talking for a little bit, but I want to bring it back to David. David's tool is fantastic. What I love about it is he released it in kind of a work in progress mode. Same way as I built the newsletter initially. Building in public is a great way to gather feedback. So please go test his tool, give him feedback, let him know what you'd like to see different. He is very openly sharing which tools he used to build it, how he went about it, which LLMs he used. So I think we could all learn well together. So do go and engage with that.
Awesome. And speaking of the newsletter and building in public and whatnot, I know we've had a couple really cool recent guests. Do you want to talk a little bit about the episode that just dropped this week with Dean Connell?
Yeah, so I spoke to Dean. I actually caught up with him in Boston a couple of weeks ago, and we sat down and just had a conversation about having, from his perspective of having helped launch WeWorks in, I think it was like 17 countries, and design the products that fit into each of those markets. What does he see as the current state of design for workspaces? What do we need? Spoiler alert, it's innovation and innovation now. And why the way that work ecosystems are changing has to affect the way you design your spaces. One of the anecdotes we mentioned is that he was speaking to someone who was calling him from a pub, but it was a BrewDog work cafe. And so the premise was he was calling from a pub, but 4 years ago, if you called for a business meeting while you're in a pub, that wasn't a good sign. But now it was perfectly acceptable. And people were like, oh yeah, I even know which pub you're in because of the branding, because of the aesthetic, because of the fast Wi-Fi and the soundproof pods and all the stuff that they do. So it's just a really interesting conversation with Dean. Definitely go listen to that. I'm still expecting that he's going to write a book, just because of the fact that he has been at WeWork for 13 years, or was at WeWork for 13 years, through that hype cycle. And he was even sent to China on his own to figure out how they could order and create a logistics machine to get WeWork furniture cheaper. Yeah. Now, I love the WeWork story, but it's a part of the story I never thought about. I just figured they just had money, that fantastic fundraiser that they did, and they just spent that all on furniture. But it seems like they were piecing the pieces together. And on that news, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, after a year after the bankruptcy, WeWork is now profitable. So it's a very fascinating story. And this is a piece of the puzzle, a piece of the story that I think has never been told.
Yeah, there's so much eye rolling that happens when you mention WeWork in this industry. And for those of you listening, eye rolling along with us right now, this was a really unique, and I've heard all the stories that you could hear. I've seen the shows, I've read the books, and I've talked to a lot of people that lived it. This was a story, and this was an experience that I was so impressed by. There were components of that business that I don't know if still remain in that organization today, but they really were, I think, not 100% in the wrong trajectory of how they were trying to view things, like understanding how to standardize certain types of components throughout the entire brand, understanding the nuances of needs in different markets, but then also managing expenses and kind of joint distribution. Really fascinating. And I'm so glad that you had him on, and I'd most definitely be interested in that book. So please do. I encourage you all to tune in. That was a great interview that we had. Well, Hector, do you want to give us a sneak peek as for next week's interview podcast?
Absolutely. So next week on Monday, you're going to hear from a husband and wife team who are building a fantastic co-warehousing / co-working product of several locations, what they've learned, the differences, the challenges they've faced in building a co-warehousing business. So definitely subscribe wherever you're watching or listening to this so that pops up in your notifications on Monday.
I'm so excited that you've got this podcast coming up. This is such an interesting niche within co-working and flex. And I feel like it's been on people's radar, but I haven't had a chance to really connect with folks outside of one or two concepts. So it'll be great to hear their story. And I most definitely see this niche and this kind of version of Flex most definitely growing, specifically as we've seen traditional industrial Flex, which was already called Flex, but for a different reason, be kind of one of the, that growth outliers for commercial real estate over the past few years.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting market. I mean, I do a bunch of work there in my day job, and it's just a kind of overlap of co-working, self-storage,
Yeah.
and logistics, right? Like kind of logistics industrial space. These three things can now overlap because each of the products are now understandable enough that you can kind of merge them together. And I think we're going to keep seeing things like that. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, we saw a fashion-based space launch. We've been talking a lot about nichification of co-working spaces. This is, a little bit within that sphere. And I cannot wait for you all to hear the conversation with them. And I'm pretty sure co-warehousing is going to be an undercurrent topic by the end of the year.
Yeah. Awesome. Another great weekly recap. Looking forward to more awesome episodes dropping and more content coming everyone's way.
Likewise, Mike, thank you very much for joining me again today and for sharing your views from your side of the screen. And yeah, thanks again. We will be back in your podcast, as I said, on Monday.